So we have.
Good morning. It's yeah. I got to mute Paul. He's not. We're not supposed to be hearing from him yet. How's it going, Mark?
I'm doing really well, Steve. A beautiful day, a beautiful day.
Is it a beautiful day? Because I'm far away. It's gorgeous here. Finally, spring has come and everything's blossomed out. But I'll tell you honestly, we got cherry blossoms here in DC area. We got lots of good things, but there's nothing like the dogwoods and
You
redbud.
know,
And he's
I am learning to
nothing.
appreciate the joy of living in East Tennessee with dogwoods and redbuds. Just remembering how beautiful they really are. It's a great gift.
Insanely beautiful. I mean, there's really hardly anything like it, and I'm not kidding around.
I will say, where for those of you who are watching, I'm glad we already have people joining us. Where Steve got married this past weekend, we were outside in a courtyard and there were some beautiful dogwoods there. And it was a great, great day. Congratulations, Steve. Show that ring off.
Yay!
A married man.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh? Um, yeah. What can I say? It was perfect. It was. It really was. It was so chill. It was so relaxed and just fabulous. I nobody went bonkers. Nobody walked off. Nobody threw a fit. There was no bride or groomzilla. Nothing like that. It was all incredible. So,
It was a beautiful day. So glad. So glad.
and thanks
And
to the joy
speaking,
of Facebook, I have received countless. I think actually I've counted maybe 458. I mean, not that I'm counting, but I've received quite a few congratulatory notes, and it's
excellent.
really great. It's really great.
Well, the beautiful day is actually rather relevant. Here, it is a beautiful day here. And the dogwoods are already past their prime and now on the downhill side. But what's relevant about that is outdoor worship for this Sunday morning. Guess what the weather report says? It's one of those, depending on, there's four different versions. One says 80% chance of rain, one says 40% chance of rain, one says, oh, it'll be okay. So here's the deal, everybody. We are having outdoor worship this Sunday at 11 o'clock. We'll have inflatables for children that start at 9:30. We're going to have that 11 o'clock combined worship service regardless. On Saturday, we're going to be sending out a church-wide email that says, yes, it's an outdoor service. Bring your lawn chairs. Or, no, it looks like rain. We're going to be in the sanctuary. But we're still going to have inflatables and after worship, a taco truck and a snow cone truck. If you want to grab a taco and come in and sit and enjoy one another's company with coffee and donuts and things like that. So plan regardless. 11 o'clock worship this Sunday. Probably outside. It might, if it's rainy, be inside. But still going to have all the special stuff attached to it.
I can't wait. I wish I could be there.
I
But
am
I'll be
very
there. I'll
excited.
be there in spirit. I'll be watching the live stream, which it will be live streamed. Which I really think that's kind of anyway. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about live streaming an outdoor worship service, but anyway.
Are you kidding? It's rocking. It's great. Rocking.
Very cool, very cool. Well, so outdoor worship is happening this week. What else?
Well, the great announcement finally was made that Seth, our own beloved Seth O'Kegley Gibson, has going to be receiving an appointment in the Denver area, Denver, Colorado. So very bittersweet, very excited for him. He gets to be a senior pastor somewhere. We still don't know the specific church yet. He gets to be a senior pastor. Very sadly, we means we will be losing him. Um, he will be here through June 5th. That's his last Sunday. We're going to have a reception for Seth on that day after the 11 o'clock services. Uh, and then we will send him with our best love and Godspeed to be a senior pastor somewhere. So that's the big announcement this past week.
Yeah, how many people do you think are going to leave First Church to follow him out to Denver? I
I
think
know of
a lot.
I think 4 would love to if it weren't in Denver. They would absolutely be out there. So
All right. Well, those are big things.
they are.
We've got a very special guest today. Um, Talk to me. Who we got? Who's our guest today?
I am so excited. Actually, we set this up. Paul Seay, the Reverend Paul Seay, called me after hearing about Seth's announcement and wanted to talk and find out what was going on. And so that in that moment of inspiration, I said, "You are exactly the kind of person I want to interview on our Thursday live." And so, would you please let us do it? And he was so gracious to agree to let us interview him today. The Reverend Paul Seay. What can we say? Currently serving at Abingdon United Methodist Church in Abingdon, Virginia. And that's a question. When we looked on the
I'm gonna put
conference,
him on now because I think you've got you're already asking questions. So
I am. I have a
I think
question.
we have some kind of interesting connectivity issues. Paul, I'm not sure he's going to be able to see you. I don't know. We'll put him on here, see what happens. Okay.
Great.
And whoops, that's just me. And then I need to put Paul. I need to put Mark on, and then I need to put Paul on, and I need to turn his microphone on. Yes.
Excellent. Well, definitely need to put Paul on. He's the young, good-looking one among us old farts. So it's nice to have Paul join. I'm so glad you're here, Paul. And one question we had immediately when we looked, if you look on our conference website, it says that you're assigned to Abingdon United Methodist Church and
Charles Wesley.
yeah, explain how you are pastor of 2 congregations.
Well, that's a not an uncommon thing, especially in Holston. My first time serving 2 churches. They call this a dual appointment, and I can't tell what the difference is between a dual appointment and what they used to call a circuit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's on the administrative technical end, which is not my area. But both churches are on Main Street here in Abingdon, and so one bears the name of the town, the other bears the name of Methodism's co-founder. Charles Wesley is a historic Black church in our conference, and just a wonderful congregation. And for about 10 years or more, Charles Wesley and John Wesley, which is a church in Bristol, were served by Robert Karaoke. And the conference changed that appointment, so Robert continued to serve John Wesley, still does, and then Trinity in Bristol. And they approached my predecessor, Robert Countess, to see if he would consider also serving Charles Wesley along with the Abingdon Church here where my office is. And they're 3/10 of a mile from each other. For obvious reasons, Charles Wesley was a northern church when this church associated with the ME Church South in the 1840s. And so, but anyway, he said yes. And then when I was projected to serve Abingdon, that appointment continued. And so on Sunday morning, I preach at Abingdon United Church at 8:45, go down the road at 9:45 and preach at Charles Wesley, come back to Abingdon at 11 o'clock and preach again. So very,
Love
very
that.
fortunate to serve two wonderful churches.
I love
And I
that because
said at my
and people in our congregation don't appreciate the joy of having that kind of a circuit experience. And there is some great joy attached to it. It's difficult at times, but
yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. I had said to a staff member at my previous church who was big in candidacy and ministry and starting seminary, and she was looking uh, different types of ministry. She said, "Did you know that some pastors serve more than one church?" And I said, "Oh yeah, lots do." I said, "My father did early in his career," and I said, "I think I've passed the point in my career where I will ever do that." And less
Yeah,
than a year later, here I am.
that's great. Well, the very first thing I want to talk to you about is Easter morning. I love to interview pastors and preachers on the act of preaching, but I've got to begin here. I find Easter morning the most difficult morning to preach of any throughout the year. I'm curious, am I alone in that? Do you find that more difficult? Is it, for some people, it's their favorite day to preach. I'm curious, where does Easter morning fall for you in that pantheon of preaching?
I think both. It's probably my favorite, and I don't know, difficult. I don't know if I used that word, but it's one that I'm thinking about really year round. And
Mm,
so sometimes an inspiration for an Easter sermon will actually strike me at Christmas. I'll see something, hear something, and I'll file it away. I feel like I mean, I don't know if I like saying it this way. I feel like the stakes are high. I just feel like I really, really want
yeah,
to be very prepared for that day. I I, I want to try to resist sometimes feeling too much pressure unnecessarily to convince the once a year person, or the person that was dragged there by their grandmother, um, that they I'm going to turn it around for them, and they're going to. But at the same time, I want them to have a good experience. But I've watched enough Easter sermons over the years that sometimes I think try too hard to cater to the skeptic that only comes once a year, and maybe actually tries to answer questions that the rest of the congregation on that day doesn't necessarily have. And so
yeah,
Easter is a day for proclamation, not explanation. It's for celebration and less than apologetics for me. So I love preaching on Easter. I find it difficult in the extent that I find myself thinking about that sermon and probably in some ways fretting over that sermon more than I do um, any other. So I resonate with what you're saying.
yeah, yeah. It's really interesting you say. I can't help but notice when there's somebody new that obviously stands out in my mind. Oh, I don't know who that person is. I cannot help but during preaching continuing to glance over at them and seeing how
Oh
they're
yeah,
experiencing the moment, and it's really a big difference when you see someone who's really engaged and, oh man, this is great, and is energized versus the person going, well, okay.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
I I I am way too guilty of focusing too much on people like that. So
Well, I certainly notice them as well, and used to. I mean, it depends on what kind of mood I'm in each year, but the ones that are too cool for school and all that.
yep.
Uh, but I'm glad they're there, regardless of whether they come back. If they're just there to please family, or I hope at the very least they have a positive enough experience with that it opens some doors and plants some seeds, and I'll take it from there. I'm not. I, I I suppose I try to have a modest view of what I in 15 minutes I'm going to be able to accomplish with a sermon, and the whole service. I hope will speak to them, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, I love that answer. You are so stinking pastoral, and I love that about you. One of the things I've always loved about Paul over the years of getting to know him is exactly that. He is a loving pastoral guy. He's one of those, and let me tell you, this is the highest compliment that as a pastor minister you can give to someone. Paul is the kind of guy that if I was not a pastor, I'd want to go to his church. So that
Yeah.
speaks
Well,
volumes to me for me.
well,
So
thanks.
let me ask you this. You're very welcome. I want to start off by, I work on the assumption that when we first begin preaching, that it takes a while to develop your own style. It takes a while to figure out what works for me and what doesn't. So what we do is begin by emulating the people that we've watched, whether it be watched on TV, Billy Graham, or watching our local church. For you, your father, I'm sure. I'm curious,
Yeah.
when you first began preaching, whose style did you try on? What influences, were impacting you the most when you were early on?
Well, it had to be my father
Hmm.
because he was my pastor, my preacher for the especially the first years of my life before I went to college. So then, to a degree, it would have been the person who was in Henry College while I was there, David St. Clair, um,
Yeah.
and loved still love listening to David preach and talk and watch him think and engage theology in the Bible. And there's richness in his theological engagement with the text that really grabbed me. But I would say after seminary, or as I was in seminary and started preaching more regularly in my internships there, and then when I was in the parish after I graduated, and it's a name that came up in one of your recent conversations, consciously and unconsciously, I was probably, for good and for ill, emulating Will Willimon, who was the dean of the chapel at Duke while I was there. I heard him preach on numerous occasions and found him to be so different than any kind of preaching I'd ever heard before, and so engaging. And yeah, so I can say more about that, but Willimon would, and I had to sort of grow with that and then grow out of it,
Yes.
and find my own voice and my own style. But I would say my first 4 to 5 years, especially, he, and then when I got to hear Fred Craddock preach a few more times, you can't really imitate Craddock. I think that's the mistake that some people have made. They think that they try. Craddock has a lot of students and a lot of really poor imitations, and
Yeah.
so
Yes.
but you can still learn from it. So, but I can say more about the Willimon's style and approach, at least what grabbed me and what I tried on for a while, and then what I sort of set aside but still appreciate about him. But,
Well, I think you said that really well. You have to try these people on and then grow into them and then let them go. But that's all part of that process of
yeah.
figuring out what works for me. I'm curious. When I look back, I think it probably took me 10 years to figure out my own style where I just knew this is me. How long did it take you to try those on and set them aside to experience what your father would have done with the sermon and then realize, well, that's not what I would do? How long did it take to formulate your own style?
Oh, let's see. I graduated seminary in 2004. So, what, 10 years and 3 months? I don't know. I'm still doing that to a degree. But I think something. I'm glad you asked that. So something happened after 5 years. I went back to school for a year. My wife and I moved up to New Jersey, and I did a 1-year degree at Prince Seminary just to do something completely different, and then went back into local church. And I remember the congregation I was serving there in Seguinsville, Tennessee. We loved that church. We'd never heard of that, or we'd never been to that town before we moved there. Thought it was a different state than what it's in. But spent 7 years there and loved it. I was still in some ways a manuscript preacher when I got to Seguinsville, and my early sermons there, I think, were well received. But I felt, and I feel like this is a slippery slope for preachers. We need to be careful with this. But I felt like I really was not always talking with the people in the room. I felt like I was presenting an essay. And
Yes.
so I did a radical thing, something that I'd said I would never do. And I stepped away from the pulpit and did preaching without notes. And I did that for the
Good
better
for
part of
you. Good for
3.5
you.
of my 7 years there. And then I went back to pulpit, and after that, I no longer used a manuscript. I just used a note card with some prompts on it. But what I learned some good things, and I also learned how easy it is to cut corners when you do that while I was in that phase.
Yes.
But at the very least, it helped. I think it changed the cadence in my voice. It changed what I felt like I was doing, and I do think, one of the terms I think in the study of homiletics, along with somebody like Craddock, is what they call the turn to the listener. And there's some
Yeah.
problems with that. Theologically, if you make it all about the listener's experience, and Willimon's part of that critique, but nevertheless, a sermon is not just someone speaking. It's something that spoken and people listen to, and so how people hear that and what's going on in that dynamic matters. And so it was during that period where I feel like I really began to find my own voice.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think you're speaking for so many of us, that realization that a sermon is not what's written on the page. It's what happens when you're present in the room in that moment and you're getting that feedback visually. Sometimes if my wife's in the room, verbally, because Annette has no problem saying amen, and I love that about her. One of my favorite things about my wife is that it doesn't matter where she is. She could be in any high steeple traditional church, and if she feels like the Spirit's moving her to say amen, she will shout amen, and it does not matter. I love that about her.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's that encounter, it's that living experience that really changes us and helps us to learn what our style is.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
I'd be curious,
So
how would you describe your style now, for someone who doesn't has never heard you preach? What language would you use to describe your style?
I don't know. I can tell you what I think I aspire toward.
Good.
I still aspire to. That's a good question. Well, without taking too much time, I try very hard still to speak to the people in the room. So I read
Yeah.
recently there was a really good article in the Christian Century about preaching. A teacher of preaching had an acting coach come in and talk to his students, and he said what he wanted them to avoid was what he called glass tube, which is that so many of us, it's like we hit play and then we go behind, whoop, the thing comes down and we just deliver what we're going to deliver regardless of what's going on outside of
Yeah.
that. And he was urging these students of preaching to learn to talk to the people in the room. So I hope that one of the things about my style is that I think that just in the moment, but in the preparation of it, I really try to think about how uh, what it's going to be like for people in the room. So I hope my style is biblical. I hope my style is theological. I hope it's engaging. I mean I think some people would say I'm a storyteller. I like to include stories. I'm not like our colleague Charles Maynard. I'm not a professional storyteller, but to the extent that a story fleshes out,
Yeah.
uh, trying to say, or gives a for instance, or gives a counterpoint to something, challenges our way of thinking, or brings an element of surprise. I like to include stories.
Excellent.
So
Yeah.
I don't, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I'm curious over the arc. I mean, you've been in ministry long enough. You've seen your style change or develop. Have you seen emotion, your ability to be comfortable with emotion change over that time? I'd say that because early on I was so
mm,
afraid of being emotional, so afraid of how that would um, look manipulative. Have you watched how you experience emotion when
yeah,
you're preaching change?
yeah. I'm still cautious. Um, in there's a country song that says they ought to put warning labels on those sad country songs. I don't know if you remember that, but I I feel like um, early on I might have gone naively sort of charged into some territory, that some today call oversharing, trying to one of the
Yep.
things about my life is that my mother died when I was 23 years old. I had just started seminary, so I mean, her that still is with me, but it was with me in a very heavy way when I graduated from seminary. And so she shows up in my sermons, but she showed up in her death and some things around that showed up a lot in my early sermons, in ways that I mean, I think we have to be cautious about um, using that so much for therapeutic reasons, or also for maybe being triggering for people in the
Yeah.
congregation. So I've played, not played, but I've wrestled with that. But yeah, I think I think to give a short answer at the end of a long answer, I think the answer is yes. I think I'm more comfortable with the range of emotions in my preaching now, and feel like I can probably handle them more responsively and think through them um, ahead of time. And
Yeah,
I will say, what's interesting is, and you preach three times or twice on Sunday.
twice right
You
now.
have twice? So I was preaching twice
Well,
at my
no, I
previous
guess I
church.
preached
It
three
seemed
times. I'm sorry, I preached three times. I preached at two different time slots, but I preached twice at 11 o'clock now again. So I'm back to preaching
okay.
three times on a
I
Sunday.
thought I thought I thought
Yeah.
you were. I won't tell either of the worshiping congregations at 11 that you thought you only preached twice. But
Well, it's two time slots. It kind of merges together, frankly. So yeah, it was kind of funny. I'm
yeah,
thinking, what
I
do
get.
I preach? Gosh. Huh.
Yeah, but even if it's twice, but now it's three times. But let's say that I share something that does get me a little emotional. If it's if by emotional we mean sad, but emotion can be a lot of things. To the
Right.
point like maybe a little choked up. It If that happens at the early hour at 8:45, um, I'm quite often very cautious about how it's going to come out at 9:45 and at 11, because
Yeah.
I mean, if it gets me, it gets me. If it happens, that's fine. But if it becomes something that is even the least bit contrived, or now's where I get emotional for the sake of effect, that still makes me a little leery, a little uncomfortable. Not the least of which is because, like you, at two of those worship services, I have instrumentalists and other people, other worship leaders who have heard the first sermon. If they hear my voice crack at the same place on two different occasions,
Yeah.
I'm like they realize what's going on. And, yeah, so
Well, sometimes the same story is moving both times. So I appreciate that. That's always my fear. And
yeah,
it kind of leads me to another topic. In that moment, what we're talking about, being present in the room, being engaged with the people in the
hmm
room, there is a certain
yes,
skill or art to being open to the Holy Spirit and feeling like the Spirit's leading you down a particular path. Um,
yeah,
and early on, that was really hard for me. It's like, no, I wrote this
hmm
sermon. This is where I should be. And then you'll feel like the Spirit's going, oh, there's a path you should go down. And then you
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
feel overly confident and go down a path that it really wasn't the Spirit at all. It was just like your mind said, oh, this would be fun to talk about. Maybe they would like that. I'm curious, have you seen your openness to the Holy Spirit change over the course of your ministry? Are you now, it is that art of figuring out what's the right time to go down that path. Have you seen that change and develop over the course?
yeah, for sure. And the trick is knowing if it's, discerning the Holy Spirit versus, like you said, my own ego. And that can take a couple of different forms: overconfident, but also it can be due to insecurity. I heard you and Troy Forrester
Yes.
talking a couple of weeks ago about there is nothing worse than having a sermon that you don't feel good about, and then your fears are confirmed at its first delivery, and you've got to give it two more times, and
Oh my gosh,
it's
that
like
is
one of
the
the weak.
worst.
It is like it's like when you have, I don't know if you've had dreams like this, but I've had dreams where I'm in a fight, and in my dream, my sleep, I'm trying to move my arms, but they won't punch, and so like a weaker opponent's
Yes.
just battering me, and that's what delivering a sermon like that sometimes feels like. You just like, I should be able to hit, but I can't. Um, and so I've had sometimes where I'm scrambling. I'm looking back at the notes I made prior to the sermon and saying, should I have followed this more, followed that more? And so it will evolve to try to improve it. And so the trick there is to decide if that's really spirit led and is going to be beneficial, or if that's more me trying to just
Yes.
make myself look better. And it's gone both ways. Sometimes that's really helped, and other times that's not helped much. I will say I had an experience. I hadn't been here in Abingdon very long, but I felt decent about the sermon the first two times I gave it. But got to the 11 o'clock service here, and our staff member who does children's ministry just gave a children's sermon that was brilliant. They're always brilliant, but she gave one that was brilliant. And she
Yeah.
said everything that needed to be said. And so when I stood up to preach, I took that as my cue to go a little bit different direction. So the sermon ended up lasting about 6 minutes instead of 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And a lot of really positive. Of course, everybody loves a 6-minute sermon, but
Yeah.
got some positive. Got some positive feedback also from the content. I hope, I trust. But my wife came up to me. She said, "Are you sick? Do you feel okay? Because you stood up and you didn't preach the same thing you did earlier, and then you were done." I was like, "I'm fine. It's just Lindsay just said it all." So, but that
That's
doesn't
great.
happen very often. But, yeah.
Yeah. No, the only time it happens to me is if the first sermon sucks so badly that I just can't bring myself to do it the second time. I have been known, I think,
Yeah.
twice in my ministry, maybe 3 times, to say, I'm not preaching this sermon and you're welcome. And here's the one illustration I have. And now let us pray or something. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm curious when you
Yeah.
think about those sermons I have no doubt when you are exactly right when you say you're biblical and theological. Those are perfect examples of words that I would use to describe you in my relationship with you, that I trust you at a biblical theological level. Do you see particular themes recurring in your sermons? Do you have one set
Mhm.
of themes that are really important to you that I mean, we'd all like to think that our sermons are really, broadly based and we cover the whole gamut of theological ideas. I'm curious, do you see certain themes coming back in your sermons?
Yeah. I can think of one, and so I'm going to use a word that gets used pejoratively. Sometimes, I'll try to, but there are theologians trying to recapture this word, and I would say one of them is the word secular. Now, I don't say that in my preaching, but what I
Yeah.
find happening is quite. And I did learn this from people like Tony Campolo and Fred Craddock and Will Willimon, and Barbara Brown Taylor does this a lot as well. Um, to name a few of influences on me, where something we might see or experience or overhear outside the walls of the church
Mm-hmm.
ends up being a parable of the kingdom, and so where the gospel lesson ends up being spoken by a homeless person on the street, or by a child, or by
Yes.
somebody in a nursing home, or something like that. So I would think that probably comes up pretty often. I think the themes around uh, the great commandment, love God and love neighbor, and the inseparability of those two commandments, and like and in that vein, the love command in John 13, love one another
Mm-hmm.
as I've loved you. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples. And trying to take all of those very, very seriously. The ways in which I feel like both Jesus' teaching and example and ministry, and then the letters of Paul really push us to continually rethink what we mean by church. Um, I feel like I hope all of those come up again and again, and then all in that mix, concern for the um, you know what Howard Thurman calls the disinherited, the disenfranchised,
Yes.
the
Yes.
the left out. Um, so I really hope that um, those things, the the what I would say, the mandate for forgiveness and for self-giving love, and not shying away from how hard that um, is another theme that I feel like I try to hit a lot. And then lament. I try to preach on lament explicitly 3 or 4 times a year. That doesn't mean that it doesn't come up at other times, but in a
Yeah.
way that takes suffering seriously. Even on Easter, when we're talking about joy, to not let that become so um, uh, rose-colored glasses, so naive that it screens out the lived reality of a lot.
Yeah.
The joy and suffering, the joy and suffering in this life can be simultaneous. So that's a few themes that I feel like I come back to a lot.
I love that. Good for you for dealing with lament. I think that's one of the conversations that we do not provide enough. And I love the fact that you allow your congregation the freedom to know it's okay as a Christian to be in lament, to struggle, to
Mhm.
grieve. That's wonderful. Now I'm noticing Luann's asking lots of questions on and I want to encourage all the you who are watching. If you have questions for Paul or about preaching, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Luann's asking some questions. I know out of her background as a Toastmaster that she's very interested in the idea of preaching without notes. And how do you
Mhm.
practice that? Do you write your sermon differently when you know you're going to be preaching without notes versus, and how do you practice it, or do you just practice the flow of it? I'm curious how you would answer that question.
Yes to all. It's been different at different stages. So when I was almost exclusively without notes, I'm trying to remember how exactly I did that. I found myself. This was a helpful tip from again to name Charles Maynard, a great preacher and storyteller in our conference. But he cautioned us in some seminar that he did once about relying too much on memorization because it's a live event. And so if you're really just
Yes.
if you're there are actors who can do this, but most of us are not among them. So if you're simply reciting a memorized script or a monologue, if someone coughs at the wrong time, a baby cries, or you lose your place, then it's all completely off. And as an aside, Mark, you may remember, and this is really all I care to talk about General Conference, unless you really want to, but you may remember General Conference in Portland. Um, a, a bishop was giving an otherwise one sermon toward the end of the conference, and the bishop uh, got lost in the what was a memorized sermon, and and uh, and she couldn't find her place.
Yes.
And so she had to go to script, and she picked it up and she's flipping through it. I said, I think I was here. I think, and it was a tragic moment. And I thought, oh goodness, just pick a direction and get out. Don't.
Yeah,
So
that's
anyway,
exactly right. That's why one of the things
so
Richard
what?
Lister used to say at Duke is have a landing strip, because if nothing else, you know where you can need to
Yeah,
land the plane.
yeah. If you're lost, then just take care of store and get out. But what I do now, because I don't write a full manuscript, I write lots and lots of notes, and then I look. They sort of begin to come together around certain bullet points, and I'm rearranging those to help them find their best order, uh, and then. I get it in the order that I want it. And then really what I do is I look over it again Saturday night to make sure that the order still makes sense. And early Sunday morning, I look over it again, and then I go for a long walk, and I say it in my head over and over as I'm going. And I do that pretty much rain, snow, sleet, sunshine. And so that it's fresh in that sense. And then I have a little note card that's got the order on it, and that's how I deliver it. Now, there've been a handful of times where I couldn't go for a walk, and there may be points later in my life where I'll hurt my leg and won't be able to walk, so I'll have to find other ways to do that. But
Yep.
for me, that's how I. So it is memorized to that degree, but I try to keep it live enough that um, that it's not just the wooden
Right.
reciting of a memorized "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." So
Yeah. And for those, I mean,
I
for
hope
those of
I
us who
hope that.
preach, oh no, I think that was a wonderful description. For those of us who preach, I find that if it's a topic I am more comfortable with, it's easier to worry less about
Mhm.
the flow and the memorization, because the topic is so dear. I can preach on David and Goliath right now. I love that story. I've always loved that story. There's a certain aspect of it that pulls at my heart and my mind. I could start right now and preach a sermon. Are there, and I'm sure it's the same way with you, there are certain topics that you naturally have an affinity for, that it's easy to engage and be present in the moment. Are there topics, and I'll go ahead and tell you one of mine. are there topics that you try to avoid or you don't feel comfortable? Because that becomes even more difficult. It's hard enough to write the sermon, let alone to preach from that place of memorization or pseudo memorization where you're just open to the Spirit moving. For me, it is ascension. That is the hardest day. Not like Easter hard. Easter is hard because you peaked when, as soon as you came in and said Christ is risen indeed. I'm done. The day's over. That's all you can say. Good Lord, sing the song Christ the Lord's risen today. Let's go home. You might as well just not have a sermon.
Yeah.
But on ascension, that mystery, the quality of the mystery of ascension, that there's so much biblically you have to explain, so much theologically to explain. I find that hard. Do you have a passage or a topic that you try to avoid?
That's yeah. I'll think about that, but I wonder, does serving in Oak Ridge with a lot of scientists make ascension hard for you because of, like, if Jesus ascended, about where in the solar system is he now 2,000 years later? Is that the
I would have thought it
the
would, because before you become a pastor in Oak Ridge, you think, oh, all these people, they're so scientifically driven, and they absolutely are in terms of scientific method. They will always pummel you with questions about your resources and why you think this. But people here are just as biblically literate and or illiterate as anywhere else. And so, no, that
okay.
you get over that pretty quickly. You do. Oak Ridge, and I think this is a wonderful thing. They will always ask you questions. Well, why do you think that?
Cool.
You have a reason why you believe that. Is there a source? What are your peer-reviewed sources for this? As long as you can provide that, they're perfectly good with it. But yeah, you get over the scientific fear pretty quickly.
And I wanted to say this at some point in there, but I was born at Oak Ridge there at the hospital years and years ago. So that's why I have the glow about me, I guess. But
that Methodist baby, you're just a Methodist baby through and through. I love that.
Yeah, I can't even help it. Like, I'm a Methodist preacher's kid, and even born at Methodist hospital.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So topics, I don't know. I'm sure if I were to examine my list of, like, if I'm looking at the lectionary, when I follow the lectionary, which is about 90% of the time, or if in the moments in ordinary time where I go, quote, off topic, I'm sure you would find some neglected things, and I'd have to examine why it is that I've neglected. But I don't consciously
Oh, you're
avoid
so
that I know
good.
of.
I love that.
No,
I love that. No, I believe it. I believe that you probably are very consistent about trying to handle the wide range of theological topics. Let me ask
I'll
you
tell
this.
you what happened.
Do you find yourself being more prophetic or more pastoral in your preaching? Do you balance that 50-50?
There you go. I probably, this is going to sound wimpy. I try to be prophetic in a pastoral way. So that's why I mentioned like the storytelling kind of thing and the surprise element, where the word of the gospel or the prophetic critique comes from a child that disarms. So I'm shocking for people who know me. I'm not a confrontational person. So I'm not particularly adversarial in the pulpit. However, I mentioned Will Willimon in my early years and his influence. Willimon never met an opportunity to offend that he avoided. And so that was one of the things that I liked about his preaching that was so starkly different from anything that I was accustomed to. And so in my early days, I probably tried to be more edgy like him. And like I said, I tried it on for a while and it fit. Oh, and I try to keep that in there, but I feel like you can only wag the finger so much until people, their defenses go up, or the people who resonate with what you're saying is like, yeah, that's right. Give it to them. They need to hear that. And so that's the problem is, but I will say something that struck me a few years ago was I probably was avoiding, not on purpose, I hope, preaching as much from the Old Testament, and so I
Mm-hmm.
will go through phases where I try to be very intentional about that. I'll do a series on the Psalms, or I'll say, for the month of whatever, I'm going to go with the Old Testament uh, lectionary passages to keep me honest there, because it is easy, I think, to be a Gospels only preacher, and there's nothing wrong with preaching from the Gospels, but that's four uh, of 66 books in the Protestant Bible. So
Right.
there's other stuff in there that needs some airtime.
I heard you say a second ago that you sounds like you mostly rely on the lectionary and then peel away
Mhm.
for different topical sermons at various points. But it sounds like you're predominantly lectionary driven. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I find
Yep.
topical stuff to be very hard to series to me are really hard to sustain unless I say I'm going to do a series on, usually it's this book or that book of the Bible that I haven't covered much before, because I've tried to get into a topical series, and
Mm-hmm.
about halfway through I just about quit. And that's not because I'm so biblical and I'm so great. I find it to be just very, very hard to do. There are people who do it well. Um, I, I I do think we got to be careful about doing topical stuff. It's well worn caution about,
Mm-hmm.
I find a topic, I find a biblical passage that supports the way I want to view this topic, and it becomes an exercise in proof texting and eisegesis, but it can be done. I just feel like you got to be careful with it, and I've struggled. I think the best I've been able to do is maybe a series on the Apostles' Creed or something on the sacraments or something like that. But
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good, good. That makes perfect sense to me. And you're exactly right. You have to be careful not to just proof text your way through a thematic experience. So now, how long have you been in Abington? This is what year for
since
you?
July of last year,
See,
so
I
just
love
a
this
little less
because
than a year.
that's what I thought. One of my basic assumptions is that it takes a congregation at least a year, more or less, to get to know your style, because your
Yeah,
style is going to be different from the person that came before you. Have you seen, and a common experience for me is after you've been somewhere a year, that's when they start saying, "Oh, I'm really enjoying your ministry, your preaching more." And has nothing to do
yeah.
with you changing, but it has everything to do with them
Hmm.
learning your style and learning how to learning how to hear what you're saying. Have you had that same experience where it takes a while for people to grasp your style?
Yeah, I think so. And at different points, it's been for different reasons. I think early on, it was because I thought I was still preaching for my professors instead of the people in the room. And again, it's
Yeah.
not that I was so smart and they weren't. We were having a different conversation. Yeah, so, I was at uh, in Sir in Hawkins County, Tennessee, for 7 years, and I would say that happened in waves, and there was a depth to it that the longer you're at a place,
Hmm.
the core of the congregation, trusts your voice, and there's something different that's happening in the preaching, and because of that. But, um, or or they get really tired of you, and we don't want to hear that anymore. Um,
Well, there's a trust what goes both ways. They feel comfortable telling you when they dislike something. The longer you are in,
mhm.
I've often said, when a
Can,
sermon's really bad when everyone who they love you deeply and they want to greet you at the door, but they got nothing to say to you. So they end up saying things like,
yeah.
"You look great today," or "Your tie, that's a
Oh, isn't
great
it a
looking
beautiful
tie."
day?
Then
Paul,
the
I've got a
people that
Oh,
question
can
for
I
you.
share?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
need to jump in. We're in the last 10 minutes, and this is part of what I do is keep time on everybody and jump in. But that
Okay.
gives me a chance to ask my own question. You used a term isogesis, and
Uh huh.
I think it would be helpful to explain to people what that is. But I want to know specifically what's the difference between exegesis and isogesis, and why is one preferred to the other? Does that work?
Good. Yeah. So exegesis is it's a method of reading the Bible that you learn in seminary. We all exegete. Anybody who reads a text exegetes, hopefully. So it comes from two Greek words, exit, out, and then ago, to lead. So it's to lead out. It's to read closely and let the text. I mean, at its best, it's you're attempting to let the text speak for itself and to take other factors into consideration, like its original context and authorial intent, and then history of interpretation of others' thought of it, to get a quasi objective reading of the text, so that you can that you're really hearing and taking seriously, and so that you don't do eisegesis, which eisegesis is a fancy way of saying reading into the text whatever you want to read or making it say what you want to say. We can't completely avoid that, and none of us is innocent of that. And I think rather than uh, falsely declaring that only exegete and I never eisegete, it's more about being aware of uh, where my tendencies are to eisegete, and where to try to ask honest enough questions of what I'm doing with the text to say, now, I realize that this particular verse makes me uncomfortable, or I know that it will make people in the congregation uncomfortable in this or that way, or so am I softening it, etc. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it
it's
does.
sort of based.
It's I think it's something I know that I have been accused by disgruntled church members in the past for not preaching the Bible. Have you ever been
Hmm.
told that you know, I want to go, I'm leaving this church because I want to go to a church where they preach the Bible. And that, like,
Verse by verse.
well, I couldn't grasp that. I was like,
Yeah.
wait, because I spend hours and hours and hours every week reading the Bible and
Uh-huh.
and really reading it deeply to try to bring forth a message. And I read the Bible anyway. But what I think that people are saying is that you're not. I think that maybe the difference between exegesis and eisegesis is wrapped up in there somewhere. Sometimes when we read the Bible as it doesn't always say what we think it should say. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think there's I've had people say, "Well, I really like X and X church because this isn't a Bible in my hand. I'm sorry, but the pastor will have his, and it's usually a him in this case, his Bible open, and will be going allegedly verse by verse. But sometimes that's a great cover for some really good eisegesis, or really bad eisegesis. It can be done faithfully, but can also be, it said here, or goodness, I mean, I know I've seen preachers who can take their Bible and they'll flip all the way through it, and I turn here and I turn here and I turn here, and they'll string together a lot of quotes. It's very biblical, but in the end, it sounds an awful lot like that preacher, and maybe not the Bible. So sometimes it's and some of it may come from the fact that maybe some of our preaching hasn't been as biblical as it could be. That people maybe fail to connect that the sermon is actually on the text that was read and not just what the pastor is thinking. Um, but yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. I've heard people
I've actually,
use a similar
I,
critique of.
I find it fascinating that those people who go verse by verse, it's amazing how often their exegesis of the text leads to rapture and blood atonement. Every verse seems to talk
Yeah,
about Jesus is coming back in the clouds. And yeah, so it's just as prominent there.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So
Luann asked another question, and this goes back to the prophetic preaching question. Do you deal with racial justice in your sermons, and what way do you hit those topics dealing with current and former incidents of social injustice? Do you is that something in this kind of age that we're living in? Is this something that you address from the pulpit?
Yes, I do. I try. I will say now, serving um, uh, Abingdon United Methodist, which is mostly white, and then Charles Wesley, which is historically black congregation, changes the way that I approach that, simply because the way that I've approached that in the past is the assumption the church that I'm serving and preaching to is white, and then when I'm preaching to a black congregation or a most black congregation about similar things, sort of the aim is different. And still here, I mean, there have been times when I felt like I needed to be more pointed about this, and I probably still come up short. But if I'm in a white church talking about these matters, I try to be invitational and non-threatening, and bring the listener along, because again, I feel like if I go too far in the finger wagging, when the defenses go up, and then the other, it's like, yeah, you give it to them. They need to hear that. So but I don't shy away from that. And sometimes I try to do it in a more subtle way, where um, some of the four instances of the stories that I tell come from maybe the civil rights movement, or talk about slavery, especially if the word slave is in the Bible. African American theologians. Uh, I don't know if that helps, but yeah, that's so. I
Yeah,
try to sort of let that be present in a way, not just this month's sermon on racism, but um, I try to let some of that permeate
that's
the
good.
vision, hoping to hold up of the kingdom.
I think I have no doubt that if you have a focus on trying to be present in the room and what people are actually going with, that it comes up, because it comes up in our culture. And I'm amazed at how many
Yeah.
pastors never mention Black Lives Matter in their sermons when
Mhm.
that was the topic for months going around. It's kind of like what percentage of pastors never mentioned 9/11 on that Sunday after 9/11 so many years ago. They had already written their sermon for the week, and I'm not going to change it. And that kind of malpractice is just a horrible, horrible thing. It was ridiculous. It was like 70% never mentioned 9/11. So I
There's a
think of that as
story out
malpractice.
there. There's a story out there. I don't know if it's true, but it should be, that after Hitler, Lord, I can't remember the exact thing. After Hitler did something, I shouldn't even say that. I think it was when they invaded Poland. But
Poland,
the
yeah,
great New Testament scholar Rudolf Bultmann was preached that Sunday and made no mention of it. And uh, somebody said that showed some of Volkmann's Gnostic tendencies. That he just wasn't relevant to his project, or what he was doing. And that may not be fair to Volkmann, who was a great New Testament scholar, but since he's not here to defend himself, I'll pin that one on him. But
yeah. I think that's
I
fair.
think
All right.
we you got to be. I think you got to be. That's the one of the real struggles, is something happens on Friday or on Saturday. How often do you let that change your sermon? Do you make mention of it? Sometimes you can utilize the pastoral prayer as a way to address it, but some things are
Right.
so big that you can't avoid it. So.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for this. This is great. I think this is the first time that we've talked with anybody who's been serving a cross racial appointment. I think that's really amazing, and brings a kind of a different sense to the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here.
Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I could talk all day, but it looks like we got to go. So.
The way it is, we've got the next program's coming up, which is what, Mark? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah, we got
I am. I
somebody else needs the
we
somebody else
try to
needs the
keep these
rehearsal hall.
down
We gotta
to
go.
within the time limits, unlike with the way
Yeah.
Mark usually preaches.
That's right. That's right. Time limit for
Well,
amateurs.
congratulations, Steve. Congratulations on your marriage, and
Thank you.
Mark, I've heard you, but not been able to see you during this. But it's been good to hear you and talk with you.
Yeah.
So,
I always love talking to you, Paul, and I appreciate your ministry so much.
All right,
well,
folks.
we'll do it again.
Yeah,
All
next
right.
week we have a very, very special program lined up, and it's going to be good. We can't say anything about it, though, right, Mark?
Well, we can say this. We can say this. We just started this program by talking about Seth is going to be taking an appointment in Denver, Colorado. The obvious question everybody has begun asking is who's coming to take Seth's place? That will not be announced. The annual conference will be making those announcements on Sunday afternoon, and we will be getting that announcement on Sunday afternoon. So we will arrange to have whoever it is that's coming to take Seth's pastoral place. We're going to try to have that person here next week to do a live interview with. So we can't say more than that, but be back with us next week, and maybe you'll get to see the very first official interview with someone who will be on our staff soon.
And that is probably the most clickbaity invitation that I can think of. You'll never believe who is going to be
Ah,
our next.
and yet it's true. It really is. It's going to be fun. I love it. We can't say anything, but come back. You know,
But it's true. We can't say anything. We can't.
that's
We
right. That's
can't.
right.
We can't say anything. So this is, come be here next Thursday, and we'll say something. Okay.
Cha-ching. Absolutely.
All
That's
right,
it.
Paul. Thank you so much. Good to connect. And Mark,
Thank you. See you guys.
we'll
Thanks.
talk at you later.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks.